#human wore the alien death suit. Now everyone's furious. The station floated in the dark like something that had forgotten how to die, enormous and silent and wrapped in 40,000 years of cold. It had no lights, no signal, no movement of any kind, and yet every sensor on the ICE's research vessel *unwavering patience* had been screaming softly since they came within range of it, the way instruments sometimes did when they detected something they were not entirely sure how to describe. Sergeant First Class Danny Okafor stood at the forward viewport with a cup of terrible coffee and watched the station grow larger against the stars. It was bigger than the initial scans had suggested. Much bigger, with long spires of dark metal extending outward from a central body that was roughly spherical and covered in surface detail too fine to make out from this distance. It looked designed, deeply and deliberately designed, by something that had understood both beauty and violence and had decided to combine them. Danny had been on 3 other alien ruin sites in her career, and none of them had given her this particular feeling, which was somewhere between professional interest and the instinct to check that her boots were laced tight. 4 of the research team have submitted formal objection notices in the last 2 hours, said Rook, her helmet AI, his voice carrying the specific tone of mild amusement he used when humans did things he found entertaining. He was embedded in the helmet currently clipped to her belt, running quietly in the background the way he always did, observing everything and volunteering opinions at irregular intervals. Submitted them to who? Danny asked. To each other, Rook said, and to the ship's general log. I believe the intention is less to achieve anything and more to have it on record that they objected. Smart, Danny said, and finished her coffee. The expedition had been assembled under the Interspecies Concordat of Explored Space, which was the largest and oldest political body in the known galaxy and ran on a combination of ancient agreements, mutual suspicion, and a volume of administrative paperwork that had once caused a junior diplomat to describe it as democracy with extra steps and worse food. 41 species were members, humanity among them. Though humanity had only joined 93 years ago and was still considered, by most of the older members, to be somewhere between a promising newcomer and an ongoing surprise. The mission was straightforward in theory. Enter the Sorvari station, catalogue its contents, document everything, and leave it all exactly as found. The Sorvari were the complication. They had been gone for 40,000 years, but their absence had not made them any less frightening to the rest of the galaxy. They had been the dominant civilization of their era, builders and warriors and engineers on a scale that still made modern species feel humble when they studied the records, and the things they had left behind in their ruins were treated by almost everyone with the careful respect one showed to old explosives, acknowledged, mapped, and given a very wide berth. Curator Yveth was waiting at the airlock when Danny arrived. He was Thalani, 12-limbed, his body roughly the size and shape of a large desk, his many eyes arranged in a band across the top of his upper segment. He was the foremost living expert on Sorvari ruins, and he had the particular posture of a being who had spent 40 years studying something terrifying from a safe distance, and was now being asked to stand next to it. I want to formally note, Yveth said, that my recommendation remains entry limited to the outer corridors only. The warning inscriptions on the inner sanctum door alone are enough to justify. I've read the briefing summary, Danny said. The full briefing is 60 pages, Yveth said. The summary covered the important parts, Danny said. Don't touch anything, understood. Yveth made a sound his translator rendered as a sigh and led them inside. The team was 8 people. Danny, Yveth, 3 researchers from different species, 2 Grethkai mercenaries who served as additional security and who communicated primarily through posture and the occasional grunt, and a young Drevathai technician named Savaran who had been almost completely silent for the entire 4-day journey but who wrote notes on everything she saw with the focused attention of someone planning a very detailed report. The outer corridors of the station were astonishing. The walls were covered floor to ceiling in Sorvari script, layers of it, some large and some so fine it required magnification to read. Yveth translated as they walked, his voice a low steady murmur. Room designations, structural notes, operational records from 40 millennia ago, but along the base of every wall, running like a secondary river of text beneath the practical notation, was a thinner line of writing that Yveth translated more slowly. Addressed to visitors, he said, it is a warning, not exactly about danger, more about suitability. The Sorvari believed that their instruments could only function for certain kinds of minds, that an object built for a specific purpose would simply decline anything it did not recognize as fit for that purpose. These inscriptions say that the interior of this station contains objects of that kind, and that most species will find them unresponsive. What kind of species responds to them? Danny asked. Yveth was quiet for a moment. The inscription does not describe it in terms I find easy to translate, he said. The closest I can manage is a species that does not properly account for its own mortality, which the Sorvari appear to have meant as a compliment. They reached the inner sanctum after 2 hours of slow, careful movement through the station's corridors. The door was sealed with mechanisms that Sava worked through quietly for 35 minutes while everyone else stood at a distance that felt appropriate. When it opened, the air that came out was cold and very old and carried something else, something that had no name, and that made the Grethkai mercenaries exchange a look and step backward. The chamber inside was tall and circular, and at its center, held in a column of pale blue light that came from nowhere obvious, hung the chute. Danny looked at it without speaking for several seconds. It was black, the deep total black of something that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, its surface made of interlocking plates that shifted very slightly in a rhythm that was almost like breathing. It was built for something roughly human in shape but larger, broader through the chest, and every surface was covered in the same fine Sorvari script that lined the corridor walls. It was the most purposeful object Danny had ever seen, the way a very good knife was. Purposeful, except the knife comparison felt immediately inadequate. One of the Grethkai mercenaries said something in his native language. His translator chose not to render it. The other one took 3 more steps toward the door. Yeveth had gone very still with 6 of his 12 limbs pressed flat to his body, which was what Thalani did when they wished they were somewhere else. Even Sava, who had remained completely calm through everything, moved quietly to stand closer to the exit. Yeveth read the inscription on the chute in a voice that had dropped to nearly nothing. This armor was made for the last war. It is not for the meek, the sane, or the sensible. It waits for the one who is none of these things. Danny thought about those words. She thought about 12 years as a combat engineer, about the number of times senior officers had described her field decisions as technically successful and deeply inadvisable. She thought about the briefing summary that had said don't touch anything. She thought about the fact that the chute was right there and that it was clearly the most significant object anyone had found in 40,000 years and that someone needed to document it properly. She stepped forward and put her hand flat against the suit's chest plate. The blue light detonated, not with violence, not with heat, but with totality. It filled the chamber in an instant, and the chute opened, its plates moving outward and then reshaping around Dana's body with a speed and precision that felt less like mechanics and more like recognition. It sealed around her in under 5 seconds, the plates locking smooth and close and immediately right in the way that well-fitted armor always felt right, and then it went still. The light faded. Every person in the chamber stared at Danny. She looked down at her hands. The chute moved perfectly with her, no friction, no resistance, as though it had been waiting for her exact dimensions. Rook, she said. Present, Rook said. Vitals are completely normal. The chute appears to have integrated with your exoskeleton. Leia without any hostile action. You are, for reference, now wearing what the Sorvari classified as a terminal class combat instrument. Initial assessment suggests it has been active and waiting in this chamber for approximately 40,000 years. How are you feeling? Good, Danny said. It's warm. I expected cold. Then the station woke up. Every communication array, every signal emitter, every long-range broadcast system the Sorvari had built into this structure came alive at once and fired a tight beam transmission at 17 different star systems simultaneously. It lasted 4 seconds and then went silent again. Yeveth read the transmission header with all 12 limbs shaking. The content of the signal was a single word in Old Sorvari. He translated it in a voice that was barely a whisper. The word was **chosen ***, and in 17 star systems, the message was already arriving. #human wore the alien death chute. Now everyone's furious. The first message arrived 6 hours after the signal. It came from the Thalani Sanctum, which was the governing religious and academic authority of Yeveth's species, and it was addressed to the commanding officer of the *unwavering patience in language that was extremely formal and extremely furious at the same time. It declared the Sorvari Dreadmantle, as it named the chute, to be a sacred prohibited object under 17 different Thalani religious codes, demanded its immediate surrender to Thalani custody, and requested that the human who had put it on be detained pending a full theological review. The commanding officer, a calm Drevathai woman named Captain Oreth, read the message twice and then forwarded it to Ambassador Prel Souza, the human diplomatic officer assigned to the expedition, with a note that said simply, *your department**. Souza was a large, tired man in his late 50s who had spent 30 years managing interspecies crises and had developed the specific facial expression of someone who had long ago made peace with the fact that his job would never be boring. He read the Thalani message, then the 6 messages that had arrived behind it from other species and bodies, then poured himself something warm from a dispenser on his desk and sat with it for a while before going to find Danny. He found her in the medical bay, Sitting on an examination table in the chute while the ship's medical AI ran every scanner had, she was eating a ration bar and watching the results scroll across the display with the calm interest of someone reading a mildly engaging article. Rook was narrating the scan results in her ear in a low ongoing commentary, occasionally noting things he described as remarkable or physiologically unprecedented in a tone that suggested he was enjoying himself. "How are you feeling?" Sousa asked. "Fine," Danny said. "Better than fine, actually. The suit seems to be doing something to my nervous system, but the medical AI says it isn't harmful. More like optimization. Rook says my reaction time is already about 40% faster than baseline." 40%, Sousa said. "Could be higher," Danny said. "They're still measuring." Sousa sat down in the chair across from her and put his warm drink on the table and folded his hands. "I have 17 messages," he said. 11 of them are formal objections. 3 are demands for your arrest. 2 are requests that the suit be destroyed immediately, and 1 is from the Grethkai Dominion, which has dispatched a war fleet to escort this vessel to a neutral station for what they are calling adjudication. "A war fleet," Danny said. "A significant one," Sousa said. "They appear to be taking this seriously." "I didn't do anything wrong," Danny said. "There was no regulation against touching it. I checked the briefing." "You checked the summary," Sousa said. "The summary covers the important." "I know," Sousa said. "I know. The problem isn't legal." "Exactly. The problem is that you are now wearing an object that every major species in the Concordat has spent centuries either fearing or treating as sacred or both, and you put it on in under 30 seconds after seeing it, which suggests a relationship with caution that is going to be very difficult to explain to 41 different governing bodies." Danny looked down at the chute. "It opened for me," she said. "I didn't force it. It just opened." "I know," Sousa said again. And that was the part that he could not stop thinking about, the part that kept rising to the surface of every political calculation he was trying to run. The suit had waited 40,000 years, and then a human sergeant from Lagos had walked up to it and it had opened, without ceremony, without resistance, as though it had been expecting her specifically. That was not a coincidence that was going to be easy to dismiss. The Grethkai Warfleet arrived 18 hours later and surrounded the unwavering patience with the practiced ease of a military that was very good at surrounding things. Their lead vessel hailed the ship and a commander named Ikathvel appeared on the communication screen. Tall, reptilian, armored in the green-black of the Grethkai officer corps, with the expression of a being who was professionally calm and personally livid. "The unwavering patience is hereby escorted to ICE's neutral station Arrowhead Null," Ikathvel said. "The human-designated Okafor is to remain in her current location and is not to be permitted access to any station systems, armaments, or exterior airlocks." "Understood," Captain Orith said. "We will comply with the escort." "Also," Ikathvel said, and paused for a moment as though the next words cost him something. "The Grethkai Dominion formally requests that the suit be removed from the human at the earliest possible opportunity." "We've tried," Captain Orith said. "It doesn't come off." The silence that followed on Ikathvel's end was very expressive. In the medical bay, 3 more removal attempts were made over the next 6 hours. The ship's medical AI tried a focused molecular release sequence. Yveth tried every method described in the Sorvari technical documents he had brought. Sava, who had barely slept since they left the station and who was filling notebooks at an alarming rate, tried a resonance approach based on the suit's own frequency patterns. None of them worked. The suit did not react with hostility to any of these attempts. It simply did not cooperate, in the way a very solid wall did not cooperate with the person pushing against it. "It's not resisting," Sava said, looking at her readings. "It's more like, it doesn't recognize the removal attempts as valid commands, as though the only input it accepts is from the wearer." "So only I can take it off?" Danny asked. "In theory," Sava said, "if you chose to. Does it feel like something you want to take off?" Sousa asked. Danny thought about that honestly. She had been thinking about it, in the background of everything else. The suit was warm and the suit moved with her perfectly and the suit made her feel, in a way she could not fully describe, like she was finally the correct size for the world. "No," she said, "not really." Sousa wrote this down and did not comment. The messages kept arriving during the journey to Arrowhead Null. They came from species Danny had barely heard of and from governing bodies that had existed for longer than humanity had been building cities. Most of them were angry, in the various ways that different species expressed anger: formal and cold, loud and direct, complex and layered with implication. A few were frightened rather than angry, which Sousa found more interesting. And one, from the Drevathai conclave, was simply a request for information, phrased with the particular careful neutrality of people who already knew more than they were saying. Sava read the Drevathai message privately, in her bunk, and was quiet for a long time afterward. She had been assigned to this mission by the Conclave directly, chosen from several candidates, and she was beginning to understand why. The Drevathai were the oldest species in the Concordat, and their oldest archives contained records that no other species had access to, records from when the Sorvari were still alive, and those records had things in them that Sava had spent 2 years studying before this mission and was only now beginning to fully understand. She wrote 4 pages of notes and then put them away and went back to the lab. On the 4th day of the journey, in the middle of the ship's night cycle, Danny woke up from a dead sleep with her mind suddenly full of information. It arrived the way a dream sometimes arrived, complete and immediate, except it did not fade. It was tactical data, movement patterns, threat assessment frameworks, a language she had never heard before that she somehow understood perfectly. It was organized and clear and enormous, the kind of education that should have taken years, and it settled into her memory as though it had always been there. She lay in the dark for a while and looked at the ceiling and let Rook catalogue what had come in. The suit transmitted approximately 14,000 operational files into your long-term memory during the last 4 hours, Rook said, in the careful tone he used when something was genuinely outside his experience. They appear to be training materials, military doctrine, threat analysis, weapons operation, tactical strategy, all of it from the Sorvari archive. It seems the suit has decided that now is a good time to begin your education. What am I being trained for? Danny asked. That, Rook said, is the part the files haven't explained yet, but several of them reference a specific target. They use the same phrase repeatedly, the unfinished enemy. Danny stared at the ceiling of her bunk in the ship's cold dark. Outside, the Grethkai warfleet flew in formation around them, and in 17 star systems, governments were arguing about her, and somewhere in the deep unmapped dark beyond Concordat space, something old was already being disturbed by the signal the suit had sent. She did not know any of this yet, not the last part, but the suit knew, and it was getting her ready. #human wore the alien death suit. Now everyone's furious. Arrowhead Null was not a welcoming station. It had been built specifically for situations where the normal stations were too politically complicated, which meant it was sterile and well-armed and staffed by people trained to be neutral in the way that sharp objects were neutral, not caring which direction they cut. The asterisk unwavering patience asterisk docked in a sealed bay, and Danny was moved to a residential suite on the station's secure level within 2 hours of arrival. They called it protective observation, which was a phrase that meant something that was not quite prison and not quite freedom. The suite was comfortable. A proper bed, a desk, a viewport with a view of open space, access to the station's general data network within approved parameters. What it did not have was an unlocked door, and the 2 guards stationed outside were politely clear that her movement was currently restricted pending the formal review process. Danny spent the first morning reading the files the suit had given her and the second morning doing movement exercises in the limited space of the suite, testing what the suit did to her body. The speed increase Rook had measured in the medical bay was real and had grown slightly. Her balance was different, better, the kind of better that usually took years of training to develop. The suit was not doing this for her, exactly. It was more that it was removing inefficiencies, clearing paths between intention and action that the normal human nervous system left cluttered. On the 3rd morning, Savaran was escorted in by a station administrator who introduced her as an appointed technical observer and then left very quickly, which was the Arrowhead Null way of saying that whatever happened in this room was Sava's professional responsibility. Sava sat down across from Danny, put her notebooks on the table, and said, "I would like to study the suit, with your permission, and I would like to share with you what I already know, which is more than I have told anyone else." Danny looked at her. Sava was young for a Drevathai, which meant she was 200 years old and looked about 30 by human standards, with the calm grey eyes of her species and the particular stillness that Drevathai had instead of nervous habits. She did not seem frightened, which was unusual. Most of the people who came near Danny these days had the look of someone doing something brave. "Talk," Danny said. "The Drevathai conclave has records from the era when the Sorvari were alive," Sava said. "Not many. The Sorvari did not share their history freely, but enough to know that the Dreadmantle was the last significant project of the Sorvari's final generation, built after they had already won the war they were fighting. When most of them were already gone, they built it and hid it. Because they believed the thing they had fought was not entirely finished, only paused, and they did not trust that any species then living would be capable of using it if the pause ended. They were looking for a specific kind of species," Danny said. "Yes," Sava said, "and they coded that specification into the suit's bonding mechanism. The suit will not open for most species. The proximity sensors read biology, neurochemistry, cognitive pattern. For the Thalani, the Grethkai, the Konn, the Drevathai, every major species in the Concordat, it gives a proximity warning and nothing else. It has been giving that warning for 40,000 years to everyone who came near it. Until me, Danny said. Until you, Sava said. I have been studying the bonding criteria from the Sorvari technical file since we left the station, and Sergeant, the specifications are very precise. The suit requires a species with high neurological plasticity, which means a brain that reorganizes itself easily under pressure. It requires physical redundancy, which means a body that can sustain damage that would stop most organisms and continue functioning. It requires a neurochemical profile in which the response to extreme danger includes heightened focus and increased problem-solving activity rather than paralysis or retreat. She paused and then said it directly. It is looking for a species that treats mortal danger as an interesting problem rather than a reason to stop. Humanity matches every single parameter, and matches them more completely than the Sorvari themselves did. I have run the comparison 4 times. The room was quiet for a moment. The Sorvari built a suit for a species they hadn't met yet, Danny said. A species they hoped would exist eventually, Sava said. The inscription in the chamber, asterisk not for the meek, the sane, or the sensible asterisk, that was not a warning, it was a description. They were describing exactly what they needed, in the only language they had for it. Danny looked at her hands in the suit and thought about 12 years of decisions that superior officers had called technically successful and deeply inadvisable. She thought about the number of times she had walked towards something that everyone else was walking away from, not from bravado but from simple practical interest, because the thing was there and someone needed to understand it. She thought about the fact that she had read the briefing summary for a 60-page document on one of the most dangerous alien ruin sites ever discovered and had considered that's sufficient preparation. How many species know this? She asked. None, yet, Sava said. I am telling you first. I intend to present my findings to the Review Council when the formal hearing convenes, but I wanted you to know before they did. The formal hearing was 3 days away. In the meantime, the station filled with delegations. The Thalani religious authority sent 4 senior curators and a legal team. The Grethkai sent Delegate Kurin, a broad-shouldered military veteran who had been publicly calling for the suit's destruction since the day the signal reached his government. The Drevathai conclave sent 2 observers who said nothing and watched everything. Smaller species arrived with formal grievances and concerns and requests that ran from the reasonable to the spectacular. Commander Ikathvel, who had escorted the asterisk unwavering patience asterisk and was now nominally in charge of station security for the duration of the review, spent most of his time reviewing the corridor plans of Dana's residential level and arranging guard rotations with the focused energy of a person who had identified a specific problem and was managing it very carefully. The problem was Delegate Kurin. Kurin had built a coalition of 6 delegations who agreed that the suit's continued existence on Dana's body was an unacceptable risk. They had not, officially, proposed anything illegal, but Ikathvel had been in military service for 40 years and he could read the shape of a plan being assembled without being told what it was, and the shape he was reading had the outline of a covert operation. He increased the guard rotation on the night of the 6th day. He was not wrong. They came at the 3rd hour of the station's night cycle, 11 of them, moving through maintenance corridors. Kurin's team had clearly spent days mapping, carrying a device that Sava later identified as a resonance disruptor designed to overload the suit's bonding matrix. The disruption would kill the wearer and the suit simultaneously, and it had the specific efficient design of something built by professionals who had been given a clear target and good resources. The suit detected them 9 minutes before the station's security grid did. Danny was already on her feet and moving by the time the first one reached the residential level. What happened in the next 7 minutes was recorded by the station's interior cameras and reviewed afterward by a very quiet Commander Ikathvel. 11 trained operatives moved through the corridor toward her suite and were stopped, efficiently and completely, without a single fatality on either side. It was not the outcome that made Ikathvel go quiet, though the outcome was remarkable enough. It was the method. The way she moved was not like anything in his military experience. Not faster exactly, though she was faster, but more correct. Every action was precise in the way that decades of perfect training occasionally produced in exceptional soldiers, except she had had the suit for 8 days. When it was over, Danny walked back into her suite, sat down, and told Rook to add the incident to the station log. Ikathvel reviewed the footage for 2 hours. Then he went to Sava and asked her one question. If she had not been restraining herself, how many could she have handled? Sava looked at her readings and was honest. The suit's combat analysis suggests the limiting factor was not her capacity. It was her choice not to cause permanent harm. ICATHFL filed new security recommendations the following morning. Danny was reclassified from containment subject to protected asset. Her guards were reassigned to an outer perimeter, and the door to her suite was unlocked. He did not explain his reasoning in the official documents, but when Sava asked him directly, he said, "A door that she could walk through any time she chose is not a door. It is a formality. I would rather she chose to stay because we treated her well than because we believed we could stop her." And 3 days later, the formal hearing of the ICE's Grand Convocation began, and Delegate Curran, who was present despite everything, looked at Danny across the council chamber with an expression that Sousa had seen before on the faces of people who had tried something and failed and had not yet accepted that the situation had changed. Hashtag Human War, the alien death chute, now everyone's furious. The ICE's Grand Convocation Hall on Arrowhead Knoll had been designed to hold representatives of every Concordat member simultaneously, which meant it was very large and had very good acoustics, which meant that when 41 species were all unhappy at the same time, the sound was impressive. The delegations filled the tiered seating in a rough arc around a central floor where the speaking platform stood, and the combined visual effect of 41 different biological forms in formal attire was something that first-time observers often described as overwhelming and regular attendees described as Tuesday. Danny sat in the chair on the central floor that was technically designated for witnesses and technically not a defendant's chair. Though the distinction felt academic, she was still in the suit, which she had not been able to remove and had mostly stopped trying to, and the suit's black surface caught the chamber lighting in a way that drew the eye whether she moved or sat still. Sousa sat beside her with a tablet full of notes and the expression of a man reviewing his preparations one final time. Sava was in the observer gallery with her notebooks, waiting for her moment. High Arbiter Zoan opened the session from the elevated central seat. She was Drevathai, very old even by her species' long standards, and she moved and spoke with the particular measured economy of someone who had presided over crises for centuries and had learned that most of them were resolved more quickly when everyone was given a structured opportunity to say their piece. She outlined the purpose of the hearing in 3 sentences and then invited the first delegation to speak. The Thalani went first because they had submitted their formal address earliest, which the Concordat rules recognized as a form of priority. The head of their delegation was a senior curator named Veth, ancient and many-limbed, who had studied the Sorvari ruins for 60 years and who addressed the chamber with the careful cadence of someone who had spent a long time thinking about exactly what they wanted to say. The Sorvari relics were protected under the Thalani Sacred Preservation Doctrine, which predated Concordat membership and had been in continuous practice for 400 years. The Dreadmantle was the most significant known Sorvari artifact in existence. Its removal from its preservation site by an unsanctioned individual, without review or approval from any governing body, was a violation of protocols that existed precisely to prevent the kind of situation the chamber was now dealing with. Veth did not raise his voice, but the weight of 400 years of institutional conviction came through clearly enough without it. The Grethkai delegation followed. Delegate Curran had prepared a formal threat assessment, which he presented with military precision, and which made a detailed and not entirely unconvincing case that one individual in possession of a Sorvari terminal-class combat instrument represented a destabilizing force in Concordat security that no existing treaty framework adequately addressed. He referenced the incident in a residential corridor obliquely, describing it as evidence of capability that exceeded current oversight parameters, and proposed that the Concordat immediately commission a working group to develop new containment protocols. Several smaller delegations spoke after him, each with their own angle. The KON worried about precedent, the Mevathai worried about military escalation. The Presh delegation submitted a 12-page written statement that High Arbiter Zoan summarized as concerned about the broader implications . The general mood of the chamber was a combination of genuine alarm and the specific frustration of people who had protocols for almost everything and had just encountered the thing their protocols had not anticipated. Through all of it, Danny sat in the central chair with her hands on her knees and her face neutral. She was listening, and she was thinking, and the suit was very quietly feeding her things, small data points, pattern assessments, the way it did now when it detected situations it categorized as information intensive. She did not need the suit's help to read the room, but she appreciated that it was paying attention. Then Sousa stood up. He did not approach the speaking platform immediately. He stood beside his chair for a moment, looking at his tablet, and then he set the tablet down on the table and walked to the platform without it, which was the kind of small decision that experienced observers noticed and that told them something about what kind of speech was coming. "I am going to say 3 things, Sousa said. I will try to be brief because I think the chamber is tired, and because what I have to say does not require length. The room was quiet in the way that rooms got when they were about to hear something. The first thing is this, he said. No law was broken. The briefing materials for the Sorvari expedition contain no prohibition against physical contact with artifacts, because every species that has ever approached a Sorvari site has had the proximity sensors drive them back before contact was possible. The regulations were written assuming contact could not occur. They were not written for a species the proximity sensors did not reject. Sergeant Okafor did not circumvent a rule. She encountered an absence of a rule that no one had ever needed to write. A murmur moved through the chamber. Delegate Curran's expression did not change, but his posture shifted slightly. The second thing, Sousa said. The suit opened for her. I want the chamber to sit with that fact for a moment. The Sorvari built that object with extreme precision and extreme intent, and they designed it to remain sealed against every species that encountered it, and it has done exactly that for 40,000 years. It opened for a human. That is not an accident, and it is not a problem Sergeant Okafor created. It is a message from a civilization that is 40,000 years dead. And the message is addressed to us, all of us, and I think we owe it the respect of trying to understand it before we decide to be angry about it. The murmur was louder this time. The third thing, Sousa said, and his voice was the same steady quiet it had been throughout. The fury in this room is real, and I am not dismissing it, but I want to name what it is actually about. It is not about regulations, and it is not about security, and it is not even entirely about the suit. It is about the fact that humanity has been a Concordat member for 93 years, 93 years, in a body where some members have been present for millennia. And in those 93 years, a human has walked into a ruin that everyone else feared, picked up an object that everyone else could not touch, and been recognized as suitable for it by the civilization that built it. That is what the fury is about, and I understand it, but understanding it does not make it a policy position. He went back to his seat. The chamber was quiet in the specific way that meant something had landed. High Arbiter Zoan called for a recess. During the recess, Sava was called to the floor to present her technical findings. She spoke for 20 minutes with the calm precision of someone who had spent 2 years preparing for exactly this presentation, and she covered the bonding criteria, the comparative biology, the Drevathai archive records, and the conclusion that the suit had not chosen Danny arbitrarily. It had chosen her because humanity, as a species, was the closest match to the Sorvari specifications that had existed since the Sorvari themselves. The chamber absorbed this in the particular silence of people processing information that changed everything they thought they understood about the situation. Then every communication array on Arrowhead Null activated simultaneously. The signal that came in was not from any Concordat species. It was not from any known species at all. It arrived on a frequency that no modern technology used, in a degraded form of old Sorvari code, and it was short. Sava translated it in the 3 minutes it took the room to stop reacting to the alert and start listening. The translation was, *, the wound has reopened. We have found the door. We are coming through *. Nobody in the chamber spoke for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then Ikathvel's security channel opened and his voice came through the station intercom, professionally steady. Long-range sensors are detecting an unknown structure activating at the coordinates transmitted by the suit when Sergeant Okafor first bonded with the Dreadmantle. The structure is at the edge of map space. It is large. It is moving. The hearing was suspended. And in the center of the chamber, Danny stood up from the witness chair and looked at Sousa, and Sousa looked back at her, and neither of them said anything because the thing they were both thinking was the same thing and it did not need to be said out loud. The suit had been training her for 8 days. It appeared the timeline had just changed. #human wore the alien death suit. Now everyone's furious. They called it the Null Reach, a region of deep space past the last Concordat survey marker, where the stars thinned out and the dark between them felt heavier than it did in map space. Nobody went there willingly. The charts listed it as unexplored, which was the polite way of saying that the 3 survey vessels sent in that direction over the past 2 centuries had returned with damaged instruments and crews that were very reluctant to talk about what they had seen. The ICE's warfleet that assembled in the days after the signal was the largest joint military force the Concordat had organized in 300 years. 41 species contributing ships, crews, weapons. It was an extraordinary thing to have built in 72 hours, and it filled the staging area outside Arrowhead Null like a city made of metal and intention. The fleet commanders held strategy sessions for 12 hours, running tactical simulations against what the sensor data suggested the target looked like, and the simulations did not produce outcomes that anyone found encouraging. The thing at the coordinates, the Venn continuance, as Sava named it from the Drevathai archives, was not a ship. It was not a weapon in any form that modern military doctrine had language for. It was a system, self-replicating and self-directing, built long before the Sorvari by something that no longer existed and repurposed by its own evolution into something the original builders would not have recognized. It did not have a crew. It did not have goals in any meaningful sense. It had a function, which was to consume and incorporate everything it encountered. And it had been dormant for 40,000 years, and it was now awake, and it was moving toward the nearest concentration of structured matter, which was, unfortunately, everything the Concordat had built. Every simulation the fleet ran ended the same way. Danny reviewed the simulations in the strategy room alongside Commander Icathfell and the senior fleet officers, with Rook running parallel analysis in her ear, and she absorbed the results with the flat attention she gave to problems that were serious and immediate and required actual thinking rather than reaction. The suit was active and very present, its plate sitting close and warm, feeding her data in the compressed way it had been doing for days. Threat geometries, movement pattern, analysis, the 40,000-year-old doctrine of the civilization that had fought this thing before. The simulations assume conventional engagement, she said, after the fourth run. Yes, Icathfell said. The Venn continuance has had 40,000 years to develop responses to conventional engagement, she said. The simulations are accurate about what happens when you fight it the way you know how to fight. They're not telling you what happens if you fight it differently. What does differently look like? Icathfell asked. The suit has a doctrine for it, Danny said. The Sorvari called it broken line approach. The idea is that you do not engage the system as a whole. You find the original architecture underneath everything it has built on top of itself, the core framework, and you collapse it from the inside. Everything else falls apart when the foundation goes. But getting to the core means going through 40,000 years of evolved defense, and doing it fast enough that it can't adapt to what you're doing before you're done. How fast? One of the fleet commanders asked. Fast enough that most species couldn't manage it, Danny said, and left the implication where it was. The fleet engaged the Venn continuance at the edge of the Null Reach 2 days later. It was not a battle in the conventional sense. It was more like a controlled catastrophe, with the fleet drawing the system's attention and response across a wide front while Danny in. The Dreadmantle moved through the gaps. The suit sensor integration with the fleet's tactical network was something Rook had worked out with the fleet's communications officers in 18 hours of intensive work, and it meant she could see everything. Every ship's position, every exchange, every place where the Venn continuance was concentrating its response and every place where it was not. She moved through the not concentrating places. The outer layers of the Venn continuance were nothing like the ancient records described. 40,000 years of self-modification had produced structures and defenses that the Sorvari doctrine covered only in principle. The specifics were hers to solve. She solved the first one in the way the doctrine suggested, and it worked. She solved the second one the same way, and the continuance adapted. She solved the third one differently, improvised from the framework the suit had given her and the reality she was moving through, and it worked again. Rook catalogued each adaptation in real time. It's learning your patterns, he said, in the tone he used for significant information delivered calmly. Faster than the doctrine predicted. You have less time at each layer than the original plan assumed. How much less? Approximately 60% less at the current adaptation rate. Then I move faster, Danny said. The suit responded to that decision the way it had responded to every decision she had made in the field. Completely, immediately, without hesitation. It was not augmenting her so much as removing limits, clearing away the friction between what she decided and what her body did, and what she decided, moving through the interior of a 40,000-year-old self-replicating weapon system with the fleet fighting to hold its attention outside, was a continuous rapid sequence of problems that the suit gave her. Frameworks for, and that she solved with what the frameworks provided and what she had learned in 12 years of doing the job that nobody else had wanted to do. The core was deeper than the Sorvari records had described. The continuance had buried it under layers of evolved architecture. She found it because the suit found it, its resonance sensors recognizing the original frequency signature underneath everything else, and she followed that signal through the last 3 layers with the fleet burning hard outside and Rook giving her time checks every 30 seconds. The Sorvari had built the collapse key into the Dreadmantle's output array. It was a resonance sequence, specific to the continuance's original architecture, designed to cascade through the core framework and pull the structural integrity out from under everything built on top of it. She had run the sequence in the suit's training simulations many times. She ran it now with her hand against the core and the continuance reacting to her presence in every direction. The sequence took 11 seconds. The Venn continuance took 4 minutes to come apart. It did not collapse all at once. It came apart in sections, the outer structures losing cohesion as the core failed beneath them, the self-replication processes stopping mid-cycle, the evolved defenses going still, the fleet outside, which had been fighting hard and taking damage, found the resistance fading and then stopping, and the commanders who had run those simulations and seen those outcomes understood what they were seeing before anyone confirmed it. The null reach went quiet. Danny floated in the middle of where the continuance had been, in the suit, in the silence, and let Rook check her vitals and let herself exist for a moment without moving. The fleet was already transmitting, voices from 41 species coming through the tactical net with the particular tone of people who had expected a worse outcome and were recalibrating. She listened to it for a while and then said, "Rook, status. Fleet casualties are significant but not catastrophic," Rook said. 12 vessels with severe damage. No total losses. Your vitals are nominal, which I want to note is physiologically remarkable given what you just went through. The suit appears to be running a systems review. I believe it is satisfied. Can suits be satisfied? Danny asked. This one might be able to, Rook said. It has been waiting a long time. 3 months later, the ICE's Grand Convocation reconvened in the main chamber on Verith Station, which was the proper seat of Concordat governance and considerably more comfortable than Arrowhead Null. The same 41 delegations, the same tiered seating, the same high Arbiter Zoan in the elevated central chair, but the atmosphere was different in the way that rooms were different after something that changed what everyone in them understood about the world. The Drevathai Conclave submitted a formal motion to elevate humanity to senior Concordat standing, bypassing the standard probationary review period by approximately 80 years. The motion was debated for 2 days. The debate was not as loud as the hearing on Arrowhead Null had been. It passed. The Thalani delegation submitted a private document to Ambassador Souza that took 11 pages to work its way to an apology and included a formal reclassification of the Dreadmantle in their religious canon. From forbidden object to object fulfilled, Souza read it twice and filed it carefully. Delegate Curran resigned from the Grethkai Diplomatic Corps. His replacement sent Danny a short message that said only, *, we are watching your species very carefully, *. Souza, reading over her shoulder, said that he considered this an improvement. Commander Ikathvel submitted a formal transfer request to serve as Dana's permanent military liaison. His reasons in the official paperwork were brief and professional. When Sava asked him why, he was quiet for a moment and then said, "Because in 800 years of Grethkai military history, I have never seen anything do what she did out there, and the next thing that requires it may not wait as long as this one did." The suit showed no interest in coming off. Danny had stopped thinking of this as a problem. She thought of it the way she thought of her own hands. Present, useful, hers. Late in the evening after the convocation, she sat alone in her quarters on Verith Station with the viewport open to the stars and read the last fragment of Sorvari personal record that the suit had released after the battle. A journal entry from the engineer who had built the Dreadmantle, written in the final days of the Sorvari civilization, translated by the suit into clean plain language. It said, *, we could not finish it. We were too broken, too few, too burned out by everything the war cost us. So we built a door and we hid it and we trusted that somewhere ahead in time, something young enough and strange enough and stubborn enough would find it. If you are reading this, you were exactly enough. Finish what we started. And then, please, rest. You have earned it, *. Danny closed the file and looked at the stars for a while. Then she said, "Rook, what else is in the Sorvari archive?" 14 additional coordinate sets, Rook said. Flagged as secondary sites, unvisited, unknown contents. Plot the nearest one, Danny said. The suit shifted with her as she stood, its plate settling, alive and ready. And outside the viewport the stars were very numerous and the dark between them was very full of things that had been waiting a long time for someone to come and find them.